8:23 is the time. Now, we often hear about soaring house prices in London and other big cities, but a new report has found that people who live in the countryside are also struggling to buy a place of their own.
The County Council's network says more than 500,000 people in rural parts of England have been pushed into the rental sector in the past decade, with demand outpacing that in the capital. Our correspondent Lucy Vladov has this report.
The Cotswolds, full of rolling hills, quaint villages and very expensive property. The demand for housing, including from celebrities like Kate Moss and the Beckhams, means the average property price is now more than 11 times the average salary in the area. For locals like Sophie, renting is now the only option.
I think everybody thinks that just because you live in the Cotswolds, you're rich. But in actual fact, you've got people doing day-to-day activities and normal jobs, and they're finding it really hard.
Having grown up with her family in the village, Sophie has been able to get a place to live, renting as part of a council-led affordable housing scheme. But for others, the options are even more limited.
No, it isn't the norm to live in this type of property, and I am very lucky. You have a lot of different type of people working in a town. Without these people doing these day-to-day jobs, the economy would fall. So where do we live? What do we do about it?
With only so many rentals available and limited supply, demand is pushing prices up and people out of their local area, something a local charity working with housing providers says will kill off communities.
There's a limited amount of properties in these very pretty parts of the country. They're within conservation areas, they're very picturesque, but that rural idyll isn't necessarily the case if you live there. So it can be really, really difficult to have that work-life balance and not have to commute for many, many miles.
The research by the County Council's network has found properties in some parts of rural England are now 15 times the average annual salary. In contrast, around major cities, that's 7.5. And that means more people are renting in rural areas, up 19% in the past decade, outpacing rises in London and England's other cities. Over in neighbouring Wiltshire, Council leader Richard Clewer is building affordable council housing for a problem he says is getting out of control.
Well, we are building 8 council houses, modular construction, all to zero carbon. So they're being built in a factory, in a warehouse. We'll come in here and get put on the pads.
He's part of the County Council's network, which wrote the report and is calling for the government to set out a long-term plan.
8 years ago, we had a housing crisis in London and maybe in Manchester. Honestly, we've now got a housing crisis across the entire country. We need government to stop tinkering with the planning system. The number of times they go in and decide to change things.
So what needs to change?
We know we've got to build X many houses. We will work out the best places to build in a way that will create communities, not to work for the benefit of the house builder, and not to work for the benefit of some rubber stamping exercise in Whitehall, but in a way that will actually build communities where people want to live and that don't create the ghettos of the future.
The government